Hello there, everyone. So this past weekend beheld both the DNF Duel Open Beta Test along with the second beta test for the King of Fighters 15. And long story short, I am incredibly disappointed in DNF Duel, especially considering that Aiding is helping to work on the game. Aiding, the same company that created the most renowned, the most hype fighting game of all time, Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I can tell you right now that DNF Duel is no Marvel 3. If you couldn't tell already, this is going to be a pretty critical video, so if you want to watch something more positive, I recommend for you to watch my KOF 15 second beta test impressions video, because I will be recording that right after I finish recording this. I just wanted to do the DNF Duel video first, since that's kind of the new thing right now. Maybe YouTube has just made me overly defensive, but I already feel as if some people are going to come after me for being harsh on the game, because it seems as if a lot of people are liking the game, and I'm going to explain why I don't like it. But first, I want to preface with, similar to Guilty Gear Strive, I really wanted to like this game, right? You guys know I was excited for it. I've been uploading reaction videos, I've been uploading analysis videos of all these character reveals, right? I was super excited for the game, right? And the game looks sick. The graphics are unbeatable. I don't think games will ever look better than this. In my opinion, this is the peak. I think graphics have peaked overall in the industry, at least with what Arc System Works is doing. Like, if I was in the past and I had to envision what graphics would look like in the future and what the end goal is, honestly, games like Guilty Gear Strive and now this, DNF Duel, this is the end goal. At least that would be my end goal with the graphics. So anyways, my point is, graphics are unbeatable, everything looks sick, the music is super sick as well, it all looks and sounds really cool, right? So I think it's automatically going to sell really well just because of those two things, right? Graphics sell games, right? Or I should say presentation overall, because sound is part of the presentation in my opinion. Good presentation will sell games, right? So I have no doubt that this game will at least initially sell well, right? My fear is that when this game inevitably sells well, I'm worried that Arc System Works might think it sold well because of these very strange and questionable gameplay design decisions in the game, rather than them realizing that it's really just the presentation and the great netcode that led to the game selling well, right? In reality, the game is going to sell well despite the questionable gameplay design, rather than because of it. And I don't know if a company like Arc System Works will really be able to distinguish between those two situations. The real question is, how much staying power will this game have? Because it has that fresh, new car smell right now, especially because of how good it looks. But fighting games are meant to be played over long periods of time, so I'm doubtful that this game is going to have any kind of longevity once players figure out the game for real and figure out how to play it at a high level. Why is that? That is because this game is very one-dimensional, and as a result, it gets boring pretty quickly. Even though I hated choosing between the KOF 15 beta test and this beta test, with them happening at the same time, my original plan was to focus entirely on DNF Duel just because I've already played KOF 15 during the last beta test, and KOF 15 is coming out soon anyway, whereas DNF Duel is coming out significantly later. So my plan was to just play DNF Duel so that way I could get an actual opinion on the game, right? Well, the beta test itself was pretty disastrous just in terms of the connections, right? We would get booted out of the lobbies, connections would drop, stuff like that. Obviously, the netcode itself is really good, but the actual beta test itself is pretty messy. So that's not what I'm talking about when I'm critiquing this game. My critique is purely based on my impressions of the game design itself, because obviously they're going to fix all of the lobby and connectivity issues, right? In that sense, this is very similar to the original Guilty Gear Strive beta test, because that beta test was pretty disastrous as well. I really thought that they were going to extend the DNF Duel beta test, honestly. But lo and behold, they did not. But I am very confident in that they are going to do another beta test. Anyway, my point is that in total, the amount of actual game time I had was probably about 3 hours. And just having played the game for 3 hours, I spent most of my time playing Grappler, by the way. I did play the Crusader a little bit, but I mostly spent my time with the Grappler, for anyone wondering. So, after playing with the Grappler for about 3 hours, it got dull pretty quickly once I figured out what kind of combos I could do, and there wasn't really much else. So, there wasn't a training mode in this beta test, right, which a lot of people complained about, but it makes sense because the primary purpose of this beta test was to test the connectivity between different players, right? And so if everyone was just labbing stuff in training mode, that wouldn't actually be testing anything that a beta test would want to test for. So it's understandable, right? The first Guilty Gear Strive beta test didn't have a training mode either, but then the second one and the third one did, so I expect that the inevitable second DNF Duel beta test, I expect that that definitely will have a training mode, so... I might be wrong about the limited combos in this game, right? Because maybe once people get a hold of a training mode, they can find some crazy stuff that wasn't apparent in the actual gameplay. But the issue is that, after having played, a decent amount of fighting games like myself, I think it's pretty apparent just from playing the game online that the game doesn't really encourage a bunch of creative combos, right? If you just pick up a game like Marvel vs. Capcom or Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, you can immediately feel and tell that there is an almost endless combo possibility, and it's honestly overwhelming at times, but that's why I really like those games. Whereas in this case, it feels very much as if you can only do the combos that were intended. So let me actually explain the game and explain the actual mechanics now. Or the lack of, I should say. The game has 5 buttons and uses a sort of pseudo-Gatling style combo system. So the 3 main buttons are A, B, and S. You can kind of think of them like a light, medium, and heavy button. So if you hit a light button, light can combo into medium, medium can combo into heavy, right? Not all the characters had this sort of Gatling system. For example, the Crusader, it seemed as if the Crusader didn't have a typical Gatling system, but for the Grappler he did, and from what I've heard from people playing the other characters, that also seems to be the case. Most characters have a sort of Gatling system in that they can combo from A to B to S. You also have an MP skill button, which is abbreviated as MS. This button corresponds to moves which use your meter. In this case, it's mana, but it's just meter. And you also have an additional button, which is pretty pointless because this additional button is called the Awakening skill button, and literally all it is a one-button super, and that's it. The reason why this is so much worse compared to other fighting games with a similar Gatling system is due to multiple reasons. One reason is that the only special moves you have will be done with either the skill button or the MS button. You don't have any special moves that can be done with the A button or the B button. So the A button and the B button are just normals. So as for the S button and the MS button, which can do specials, pretty much any kind of combo route, I'm sure there are going to be exceptions, right? But the only combo routes are going to entail doing a Gatling of A to B to S, or just off of any of those hit confirms, right? You can go from B to S, or A to B to S, or S to a special move, right? All of these combo routes seem to just be Gatling into a skill button move into a mana move, the MS button that uses mana. And that's pretty much it. So most of these combos are just 5-button combos, which get old pretty quickly, as I've been saying. It just seemed as if you had one combo that the character could do, and that was the only combo you were doing over and over and over, and it didn't really require much situational awareness in thinking of what combo should I do in this situation, right? I'm sure this game has some corner-specific combos, so outside of just having a mid-screen bread and butter and a corner bread and butter, I don't think there's going to be that much mental engagement in terms of deciding which combo you should do in any given situation, which is what most of the fun is, if you ask me, when it comes to fighting games, dealing with the situational awareness, right? I like mentally engaging things. That's not a controversial statement, right? That's why I like video games in the first place, especially fighting games. I like to be intellectually stimulated. I like having to fight another human on an even playing field and it being a mind game, essentially, right? I have no doubt that this game is going to be competitive, obviously. I don't think any one fighting game, or even any game in general, I don't think any kind of competitive game is more or less competitive than another game, because if you have people playing it, they are going to make it competitive, right? It's just a matter of fun, right? You can have something be super competitive, but it's not going to be very fun if there's not much thought going on behind it. Dive Kick is a great example of an extremely simple fighting game, right? Dive Kick is pure competition. No one can deny that. But is it particularly fun? I don't think many people would say it is, although it is a very funny thought experiment. I just wanted to make the important distinction that just because something might be competitively viable, that does not necessarily mean that it is inherently fun. I think that you should design games with fun in mind first, and then if enough people are enjoying the game and enough people are having actual fun with the game, then they will naturally become more invested in the game, and then they will eventually be so invested that they try to become competitive at it, right? It's not that complicated. So, TLDR for my first main point is that the combos are super dry and not saucy at all. My second main critique is something that I think would actually be much more easily fixed because my first point is something that is just an issue with the inherent game design of the game itself, whereas this second point is actually an easy fix. So it's regarding the S button and the MS button, the skill button and the MP skill button. Like I said, these are the only buttons which will allow you to do special moves, and this game does a simplified version of special moves. It doesn't necessarily require motion inputs as most fighting games do. This game adopts kind of what Power Rangers Battle for the Grid did, in that you get special moves by essentially inputting a command normal input. So instead of doing a quarter circle or a DP motion, for example, to get a special move, you would just hold forward and press the button, or just hold back and press the button, or just hold down and press the button, etc. Like Smash Bros, when you're doing special moves in Smash Bros, you're just holding a direction and pressing a button instead of rolling the stick and turning butter with the stick. The weird thing is that each of these special moves, which can be performed by just holding a direction and pressing a button, can also alternatively be performed with a traditional motion input, the motion input obviously varying depending on which special move you want to do. This is similar to something Arc System Works did with Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. That was another fighting game in which they were outsourced an IP to make a fighting game for, Grand Blue in that case. So Grand Blue Fantasy Versus had the option to do a motion input or to do a simplified input. But in that game's case, you could do the motion input to get a reward. Essentially, you're being rewarded for doing the more difficult input. So that game had cooldowns for your special moves, and so if you did the simplified input, it would activate a cooldown, and it would prevent you from doing that move again. But if you did the actual motion input to get the move, then it would not initiate a cooldown. So there was an actual incentive for doing the motion inputs, meaning that at a higher level, if you wanted to be competitively viable in that game, you would pretty much have to do motion inputs on all of the special moves, right? If you wanted to get the most out of it and just have a competitive edge. So at high level, no one was doing the simplified moves, meaning that was definitely a much better idea in how to incentivize new players to just play the game at a casual level, while also preserving some kind of high-level play, right? The simplified motion inputs did not interfere with the high-level gameplay of that game at all, considering you could always just do the motion inputs and were actually rewarded for it. The issue with DNF Duel is that doing the motion inputs rather than the simple inputs seemingly had no benefit. So, yeah, while they may have motion inputs in this game, if there's absolutely no reason to do it, if the game offers no incentive to do the harder version, then nobody's going to do the harder version. In which case, I have to question, why did they even add these motion inputs at all if there's no reason? Maybe with the MP skill button moves, they could make it where they could make it so that you don't use as much mana. I think that would be a good enough incentive, right? But I don't know what they would do for the special moves which use the S button, because those moves don't use meter, they don't use mana. So I guess if you were to do some kind of incentive for those moves, you'd have to make them just do more damage or something like that. Like I said, this would be an easy fix, right? Because this is just a matter of changing some numbers in the code. It wouldn't be a matter of actually reworking whole game mechanics, right? So this is my second main point, but it is the easiest fix. So I partially expect that they will fix this one. Even if they fix this, though, that will not sell me on the game, which leads me to point number 3, which is my biggest critique and the biggest reason for why I don't like this game. In hindsight, I probably should have put the most important critique at the beginning of the video, but I'm doing all of this unscripted, so who cares? What's funny is that there actually was a bit of foreshadowing to my main critique about the game mere hours before the beta test went live, because during the day preceding the beta test, the official DNF Duel channel uploaded some videos explaining the game mechanics, and myself, along with other people, began to get a little skeptical when a certain video got posted, a video which didn't explicitly say that the game had a block button, but anyone could reasonably deduce from what they were saying that the game has a block button, and lo and behold, it does have a block button. The way they were sort of implying this is that they were explaining how to perform a roll. How you perform a roll is to press forward while guarding. Anybody that is familiar with fighting games would immediately assume that that means the game has a block button, because typically in 2D fighting games, holding back is how you block, right? You either hold back or you hold down back. And so it would be impossible to input forward while simultaneously holding back or down back, right? That is why people assumed it would have a block button. And like I said, it does have a block button. Why is that a problem, you might ask? The reason why that's such a concern is that it eliminates the possibility of what is called a cross-up. So for anyone not familiar with typical fighting game terminology, a cross-up is a specific kind of mix-up. A mix-up is when you put your opponent in a situation in which they have to either guess correctly to not get hit, or you just put them in a situation in which they have to react very quickly in order to not get hit. So a cross-up specifically is when you either jump behind an opponent or you do a move which places you behind the opponent, and then they have to suddenly switch their guard in order to block your attack. Remember how I said typically in 2D fighting games you have to hold back to block? Well, all motion inputs in a 2D fighting game are relative to where your opponent is. So if you are on the left side of the screen, if your opponent is on the right side of you, then holding the stick in the left direction is back. But if your opponent suddenly jumps over you and lands on the other side, or if they do some kind of teleport move or something that puts them on the other side, and you're still holding left, that would mean you are now holding forward, meaning you won't block their attack, right? So whenever your opponent would jump over you or teleport behind you, you have to quickly switch your block. You have to quickly push the stick in the other direction, so that way you can actually block their attack, right? So a cross-up is when you try to do this very quickly, so you can sort of hit your opponent before they have a chance to react and switch directions. So that is one of the core facets. That is one of the main ways you open up your opponents in 2D fighting games. So if it's a button, in DNF Duel's case, you just have to hold the button to block. It doesn't matter which side your opponent is on, right? So if you're holding the block button and your opponent somehow appears behind you or jumps over you and appears on the other side, and you're still holding the button, you are going to block their attack no matter which side they're on. So even with just that omittance, it would make sense that the game would become way less offensive and way more defensive, because defense would just inherently become a lot stronger, right? But that is not the only way in which they nerfed offense in this game. So not only is this game lacking cross-ups, but it is also lacking the other way in which fighting games typically allow you to open up your opponent. So I said a cross-up is a specific kind of mix-up. The other main kind of mix-up is a low-high mix-up, or a low-overhead mix-up. So typically in 2D fighting games, you can either do a high block or a low block. A high block will block overheads and highs, but will leave yourself open to lows, whereas a low block will block lows and highs, but leave yourself open to overheads. So lots of times, you can open up your opponent by doing a high-low mix-up or an overhead-low mix-up. You're forcing your opponent to guess if you're going to do a low attack or an overhead. Typically in fighting games, lows are much harder to react to than overheads, so as a rule of thumb, when you're guarding a block string or something, you are holding down back, so you're going to automatically block any kind of low, but then you want to be ready to react to an overhead, because like I said, typically overheads are much more telegraphed and easily reactable than lows. But of course, you're not always going to react to these things perfectly, hence why people get opened up, right? This game, however, DNF Duel, for some reason, has no grounded overheads. What I mean by that is that if you jump and do an attack, that is an overhead, which is normal, but you don't have any kind of grounded overheads. So, again, that completely eliminates any possibility for a mix-up. And so it results in just a lot of blocking and not much comboing. And my prediction is that the meta is eventually just going to revolve around baiting for whiffs, so you can do a whiff punish, or frame traps. When I was playing the Grappler, I did find a frame trap, so I'm assuming that will be a big part of his kit. But that's just not very fun by itself. The one mechanic in this game that I actually do really like is sort of a combination between the Baroque system from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom and the Roman cancel system from Guilty Gear. So basically, it allows you to press a button. Well, it's actually two buttons, but you can make a macro for it. It's the B button and the S button together. It's called conversion in DNF Duel. So basically, you can press this button, and it will convert some of your health into meter. So effectively, it's a risk/reward system in that you are sacrificing your health, making yourself more vulnerable for the opportunity to deal more damage, which is actually a pretty cool idea. And I'm really glad to see something from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom resurface in a modern fighting game. But like I said, it's also similar to the Roman canceling from Guilty Gear in that you can use it to cancel the recovery of moves, whether they be whiffed or blocked. So my prediction is that this is also going to be a very big component of this game's meta once people figure out the game. So it's going to involve a lot of whiff baiting, it's going to involve a lot of frame trapping, and it's also going to involve canceling unsafe block strings into a safe block string by utilizing the conversion mechanic. So basically, a lot of blocking, even more blocking is going to be happening. So just in case I haven't made myself clear yet, or if someone listening is just skipping around the video and they skipped to the end, my main 3 critiques are that 1, the combos are very short and the game doesn't encourage much combo variety, which gets old very quickly. Second of all, this game has motion input options for the special moves, but it doesn't offer any kind of reward or incentive. So, like I said, that one can be easily fixed. But the third critique, which is my main critique and the biggest one, and I really can't overstate this because maybe some people new to fighting games might not think this is a big deal, but really this is extremely unprecedented for a fighting game to not have any kind of mix-up opportunity. So DNF Duel, this game is not only lacking cross-ups, but it's also lacking grounded overheads, which means that there is just going to be so much blocking and not opening people up. That's not fun to watch for me. Obviously, the game looks really cool, so I guess a lot of people that don't know much about fighting games like watching it just because it's very well animated and all the characters look cool. But just in terms of watching the game in order to watch these two people have a battle with each other, it's not going to be that exciting. So, like I said earlier, I'm really curious to see how this game ends up being. As it stands right now, I have zero interest in actually buying the game. I will be getting King of Fighters 15 instead because that game actually is super fun and encourages all these different combos and has so many different ways in which you can mix your opponents up. King of Fighters 15 is great, but I'm going to be recording a separate video for that. So I'm not going to be buying DNF Duel, but I definitely will be playing the next beta test if that is a thing, because I'm just curious how the game is going to be, right? Like, I want to play the next beta test just to see if they changed anything, if anything at all, right? So let me know what you guys think. If you guys played it yourself, let me know what you think about the game. But if you haven't played the game, let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will try to answer all of them. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I will see you all later. So bye for now.